Welcome to the SuperAbundant Life podcast, where we teach the Bible in a simple, authentic, and practical way so that Christians can skillfully apply the Word of God to create supernatural results in every area of life. This is your host, Olawunmi Brigue. This week, I want to continue along the theme of marriage/romantic relationships by focusing on the marriage itself. So after you say I do, I'm going to be talking about one of the most important things you must know and practice in your marriage. And it is simply this: love languages. That's the secret to intimacy and heartfelt commitment in your marriage. Do you know what? One of the reasons why I personally like the SuperAbundant Life podcast, do you know that I listen to my own podcast? As in, I listen back and I'm like, oh my goodness, and I take notes and I learn as well from what I'm teaching. So I'm not just showing up to say, oh, I know all these things perfectly, and then I'm just dishing them out to people. No, I'm learning from what I'm teaching as well. But one of the things that I value very much about the podcast, and I always make sure is standard, is the fact that I don't come to teach anything that I haven't yet tested or proven. When David showed up wanting to kill Goliath, Saul said to him, "Come and take my armor and wear it." Now, it was a huge honor for Saul, the king, to offer his armor to David. But David looked at it and thought, that's a huge honor. I mean, you're asking me to show up and turn up as king, because once you put on the armor, nobody really knows who's behind it. So they would think, oh, this is the king, and maybe offer some kind of reverence. But even though that was quite tempting, David said, no, I haven't tested it. I haven't proven it. I wouldn't even know what to do with it. Now, it's quite tempting for us, especially if you're a person that creates content. It's quite easy or tempting, I'll tell you that, for us to think, oh, that looks good. You read something, I think that's really great. I'm going to just go and share it. It's tempting, the same way it must have been tempting for David to want to wear Saul's armor. But the truth is, the only thing that generates power, so the words that generate power, when you speak them, are words that are coming from something that you yourself have tested. That is how this world works. So if you go around, for example, telling your children, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, but you are not doing it yourself, they hear you, and maybe because of fear of punishment may go ahead and do it. But those words are not really backed by power. So you're not empowering them to do that thing because you yourself are not doing it. So it's important to me to only share things that I have walked through, that basically I have earned the anointing in the place of crushing, so that when I speak, my words are anointed and are actually changing people's lives. So why did I say all of that? I say all of that because when I talk about love languages, when I say that this is something you must learn and you must practice in your marriage, I'm not saying it because it's a popular book. I'm saying it because, hey, when I learned this thing in my own marriage and I began to practice it with my husband, literally our marriage just took on another identity. I came across the book maybe about a few months into our marriage, but I'm going to share all of that later. But when I say that, if you haven't come across love languages before and you're not practicing it, or you've read it, you're like, oh, that sounds nice, but you haven't actively practiced it, I want to strongly encourage you to do so. So I'm going to walk through what love languages are and how they can literally, not figuratively, literally heal your marriage and take it to the next level. So the 5 love languages are concept created by a man called Dr. Gary Chapman, who is a well-known marriage counselor. Now, what are they? When you talk about the 5 love languages, what are the 5 love languages? According to Dr. Chapman, the premise of the 5 love languages is that different people with different personalities give and receive love in different ways. And that is essentially the bulk of it. He's saying that you don't just have one way of communicating love, of showing love, which was completely new to me. I was like, what? You mean there are different ways that you express love to people? I didn't know that. My mother never sat me down to teach me that. I didn't understand that actually different people have different ways that they can actually receive love, and you should give them love in that particular way. That was completely new to me. And he says that by learning to recognize these preferences first in yourself and then in your loved one, you can learn to identify the root of your conflicts, connect with your spouse or your children more profoundly, and then truly begin to grow closer. That sums up the benefits of learning love languages and then practicing them. Now, what are the 5 love languages? I'm going to walk you through the 5 of them. Now, a lot of you that are listening to this, you would have come across the 5 love languages. So take this as a reminder. And then further on in the episode, I'm going to show you actually why this principle works. So it's not just that it works. I like to unearth and unveil why something works, because when you have more light, more understanding regarding something, it helps you commit more to doing it, because you're like, oh, I get it now. I can see why I should do this. All right. So what are the 5 love languages? Number 1 is words of affirmation. And what does that mean? It means that people whose primary love language is words of affirmation, thoughtful, loving, and encouraging words are precious to them, while harsh words are not easily shrugged off and can cause deep wounds. You say, but nobody likes being talked to anyhow. Yes, I get that, right? I mean, everybody likes encouragement. Everybody likes it when somebody walks up to them and says, good job. Yes, agreed. But we're saying there's a certain set of people that the words mean the world to them. I'll give myself as an example. Words mean something to me. I mean, if somebody comes and tells me I've done a great job, etc., etc. But to be honest with you, words are not that deep for me. I'll acknowledge it and I'll say thank you, but I'm like, okay, next, let's move on. What's the next thing we need to achieve? But for someone else whose primary love language is words of affirmation, just someone that they love, that they value, that they respect, showing up and saying, well done, just 2 words, well done, means the absolute world to them. Yeah. So that's words of affirmation. The next one is quality time. For people whose primary love language is quality time, giving them your undivided attention and taking time to do things together with them is what they value most. Not showing up and say, oh, let's spend time together, and 90% of the time you're on the phone or you're talking to your teenage son and you're saying, talk to me, what's been happening at school. And before they say, actually, mom, I'm thinking of dropping physics. Oh, you can't drop physics. I'm thinking of dropping art. Hey, what? What do you mean? Why do you want to do? Do you understand? He's also listening. You haven't even allowed them land. So it's giving them undivided attention, allowing them to know that I'm here in a very non-judgmental way. I'm here for you. I'm here with you, regardless of anything. That is quality time. Okay. The next one is receiving gifts. And for those whose primary love language is receiving gifts, this is what they value. Investing thought, time, and effort into researching and picking out a gift that has an emotional value to them makes them feel very special. Again, notice that it says investing thought, time, and effort into researching and picking out a gift that has an emotional value to them. So someone, for example, whose love language is receiving gifts, it might be something that costs you £5 that literally they're like, oh my God, and they'll start crying. Why? Because you researched. Maybe they were thinking about it. Maybe it just makes them feel better. You know, they feel a bit sad, and then you bring something that reminds them of a success or a victory that they had 5 years ago, and everything connects together, and they feel like, oh my goodness, everything is going to be okay, and they start crying and thinking it's only £5. Do you understand? Meanwhile, if the attitude is wrong and you go and buy, a husband goes out and buys jewelry that is £20,000 or something and just throws it anyhow and says, take, or whatever it is. Or let me tell you, the one that annoys especially women the most. especially if the primary love language is receiving gifts. The woman says, you don't even buy me gifts if my birthday, and the guy replies and says, but my money is your money now. If you want to buy something, just carry it from the bank account and go and spend it. And like, you just don't get to do you. I know I have access to the money, but me just carrying it and spending it is not the same. Do you understand that? That can be quite frustrating for someone whose primary love language is receiving gifts. So for me personally, my primary love language is not receiving gifts. So if my husband says, whatever you want, take the money and buy, I will happily do it and I will not feel offended. But someone whose way of receiving love is you putting the thought, carefully planning and sitting down and thinking, what would she like or what would he like? And taking your time and your energy to actually research and plan it out and then get that thing. That is what communicates love to them. The fourth one is acts of service. And the people who primarily receive love through acts of service, doing things that help relieve and ease the burden of responsibility, is a great way to communicate that you love them. This is probably the most boring of the 5 love languages, and this is my primary love language. I noticed that a lot of people that are driven, they feel like they want to make the world better and all those kind of things, they carry this burden of responsibility. They're the kind of people that they can't just walk into their house and everything is messy and then just go and make a cup of tea, sit down and just drink the tea and watch TV. They're like, I can't sit in here. It's too messy. I have to tidy up. So there's a burden of responsibility upon that kind of person because they always want to improve. They always want to move forward. They always want to move the people in their lives forward. Now, for someone like that, the way you communicate love to them is to help ease that burden of responsibility by doing things. So these are people that receive by people doing things for them. Not grudgingly, not, I don't even understand, right? Doing it to communicate that I see your burden of responsibility and I love you enough to want to ease that burden of responsibility, especially when they do it without being asked. That's my love language, and I know that when my husband does something for me without me asking, I'm just like, wow. It really blows my mind. You mean I didn't ask you? I was thinking it, man, I don't want to bother him, he has a lot that he's doing. And then he now does it without me asking. That day, is all kinds of loving. Because my head will be swelling like, oh, wow, this man loves me so much, yeah? And the last one is physical touch. So people whose primary love language is physical touch, being physically near them, such as holding hands, hugging, cuddling, and all those kind of things, makes them feel validated, safe, and emotionally connected. Yeah? So they are the huggers. These are the huggers. They will hug and hug. Not just this, Christian side hug in church. Like, no, they will hug you tight. They want to cuddle. They always want to maybe stroke your hair and all those kind of things. They want to hold your hands, etc., etc. Now, these are people that, right, love is communicated to them through physical touch, through actually being literally physically near the person that they love. So how did I come across this whole concept of 5 love languages? Less than a year after we were married, I went away on this 3-day conference. Now, I had booked the conference. It was a conference that I attended every year. It was outside of London, so I would basically just drive up there, maybe pack Maxine before I got married, and we would go up there. But this time around, I decided, the introvert in me saw it as an opportunity to lay you people, okay? Because one of the hardest things that I had to deal with after getting married was the fact that people were in my space, in my head, around me, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I was like, I can't handle this. So I saw it as an opportunity to get away. So I decided I was going to go by myself. I'm not taking anybody with me. Husband and children, stay at home. Me, I'm going. So I went on this conference by myself. And let me say something else so that I can give you some context. I'm the kind of person that I like my environment very clean. Okay, especially at the beginning of marriage where I was very finicky. Everything had to be in its place. Everything had to be super clean. Now, after living how many years now with people that are not exactly 100% like that, you learn to chill. I'm telling you, you learn to chill. Like, hey, okay, we'll sort it out later. I'm not like I was when I got married. Okay, but when I got married, I was super freaky about everything being absolutely clean. As in, I would walk into an untidy room and it would be as if my brain just freezes. And I'm like, I can't do anything until this room is tidy. That's how I was. So imagine how nervous I was to leave my husband and 2 kids to their own devices for 3 whole days, because I knew that these people were not exactly very tidy. I mean, they would do their best, but they were not as tidy compared to my own standards, and my standards were almost impossibly high. Now life has beaten me into shape. Like, you better let it go. But at that time, I was like, no, everything has to be super clean. So I knew while I was going on this thing, I was partly excited about getting 3 whole days just to sit in the long drive. I think it was about a 4-hour drive, to be able to think, to pray, to just enjoy my own company, go to the conference, be recharged, and then drive back home. I was very excited about that. But at the back of my mind, I was also quite apprehensive that, oh my God, by the time I come back, this house will be a nightmare. Everything will be dirty. There will be clothes all over the floor. The kitchen will be a mess. They would have attempted to do all sorts of things and concoctions, and everything would just be, an absolute nightmare. That was ringing in my mind throughout my getaway. I was literally expecting to return to a bomb site. So I finished the conference and then I came back home, drove home. As I approached the front door, and they were like, oh, she's back, and everybody's excited. I was like, God, just give me the grace. Give me the grace to be able to handle what I see in there. Don't let me spoil this joyous reunion with, why is the kitchen like this? Why is this one like this? I don't understand. Didn't you people? I was like, God, the grace, the patience to just soak it in that I'm back with my family and not make a big deal out of nothing. I was praying to God. I said, God, just help me. Just help me. And then what happened? I walked into the house and the house was perfectly clean from top to bottom. Not only was it perfectly clean, they had been cooking. So they had cooked all sorts of things, stew, as in, I was like, and not only had they cooked, but the kitchen, they had cleaned up everything and it was super clean. I was just standing there like this, like with my mouth open, like, what happened here? And honestly, I cannot tell you how special I felt. I cannot tell you how grateful I felt to my husband. I can't tell you how much I loved him in that simple moment of coming back and thinking, oh, he thought of me. He knows that I don't like dirty environments or untidy environments. And he sat down to think of, oh, this woman has gone away. She's finally had some time to herself for 3 days and she's coming back. All of that could evaporate literally within 5 minutes of coming back to something that she would have expected otherwise. For me, it was just the fact that he sat down, he thought about all that, and then he rallied the kids and they made it happen. And I was like, wow, this is the nicest thing that you have ever done for me. Now, just to put it in context, my husband has basically showered me with gifts. He's bought all sorts of things. He's written me love notes and all that. But simply somebody making sure that the house was tidy for me was the most thoughtful thing he had ever done. And of course, now I was all smiles. I was enjoying my family and all that. So I let that moment pass, but I kept thinking about it. Wait a minute. Why is it that when my husband just randomly shows up and surprises me with a beautiful gift, I'm like, oh, that's lovely, thank you. And the thing doesn't really touch me. Why is it that it was them cleaning the kitchen and making sure that the house is clean that touched me so much? I couldn't understand it because I had never heard of anything called love languages. That concept had never formed in my mind. But not long after that, I stumbled across the book 5 Love Languages, and that was when the light bulb went on. I was so excited when I read this. I was like, now it makes perfect sense. And I gave it to my husband too. He read it, was like, wow. As in, we were blown away by the book. Now, it occurred to me that, my husband actually taken the time to make sure that I return home to a clean house and a nice cooked meal had made me feel special, because that is my love language. That is how I receive love. That is how love is communicated to me. The best way I receive love is through acts of service, thoughtful acts of service. And the realization that came from reading that book, literally, as I said, blew my mind. I was amazed at how something so simple could have such a monumental effect. Now, prior to me coming into this understanding, and like I said, this was early on in our marriage, the first few months of our marriage, before that incident of me going away and then reading the book, my husband and I struggled quite a bit to maintain that deep affection that we had towards each other, because somehow it was always quibbling about this, about that. Oh, you didn't do that, you didn't do this. So there was always like little things that, was creating conflicts. And we couldn't quite understand it. Somehow, both of us were trying to show the other person that we love them, but at the same time, neither of us was feeling particularly, truly loved. I kept doing all sorts of activities to show him how much I love him, and he would every now and then jokingly say things like, you're not even showing your husband some love. And I'd really be confused. Like, what are you talking about? What do you mean I'm not showing you love? What about all these things I've been doing? I mean, as in, I will pack his lunch, get up, make sure, myself, I was working. So I was working, and me too, I had to leave the house early. Drive, go and drop my son at his childminders, who would then take him to school, and then start heading to work. And all of that, right? So wake up early, pack his lunch, make sure that everything was set for him, put it in his bag, and then he will go off and all those kind of things. So I was doing things like that I was like, I just want to show this man how much I love him and honor him and respect him. And then imagine after doing all those kind of things, you now hear somebody say, you're not even showing love. I was like, hello, what do you think I've been doing? Meanwhile, he, on the other hand, would write me the most beautiful words. So he would send me a text, he would write me a note and leave it somewhere for me, expressing his love, his appreciation, and I'll read it and I'll go, oh, that's so sweet. Oh, thank you, my love. And I love you too, and all those things. But at the back of my mind somewhere, I'm thinking, okay, now will you please go and wash the bathroom without me asking, so that you can really show that you love me? I mean, it may sound a little bit ungrateful, but you can't fault someone for wanting to receive love the way they were wired to receive love. That's what we don't understand. So we were starting to get a little bit offended with each other. So he was doing all that, communicating his own love language to me, which his own love language is words of affirmation, which is funny, right? Because God gave him a wife who doesn't talk very much and is not very mushy with words. So that's where the growth comes in. So his own love language, primary love language, is words of affirmation. So he kept trying to express his love through his own primary love language, while I, having the love language of acts of service, kept trying to express my love for him through my own love language. And the wires were just crossed. Even though we were both doing and giving, the thing was not really landing. And as a result of that, offense and bitterness was starting to enter. Like, I'm doing all these things and I still don't feel loved. I don't feel loved. They're not showing me that you love me. That was literally what we were both trying to communicate to each other. I don't feel that you love me. You're not demonstrating to me that you love me. So this went on for a while, each person doing their best to show love, but each person still feeling quite unloved. Now, after I learned about love languages, I realized that my husband and I were trying to communicate our love for each other in the way that we receive love. Now, let me explain that. You see, my husband's love language, as I said, is mainly words of affirmation. Mine is acts of service. In trying to show that I love him, me doing things for him or him writing me loving words to express his love for me was like me or anyone speaking Yoruba to someone who doesn't understand a word of a language and then getting frustrated when they don't respond. If I fly to China, for example, the chances of meeting somebody there, a Chinese person that speaks Yoruba, probably very, very slim. I arrive at the airport and I start speaking Yoruba. And because they are not responding the way I want, my voice gets louder. I start to gesticulate even more wildly, like trying to say and speak slowly and all those things. Meanwhile, they're speaking back to me in Mandarin, for example. I'm shouting Yoruba, they're shouting Mandarin, saying, do you understand what I'm saying? Both in our languages. No. Frustration. That is what will be created in that kind of scenario. That's exactly what it is with love languages. That's why it is called love language. So if I go and start speaking Yoruba, even though I understand Yoruba and someone can communicate Yoruba to me fluently and I would understand what they're saying, you have to ask yourself, does the person that you're speaking to, does that person understand Yoruba? That's what love languages are. So I speak acts of service very well. I would do acts of service to show that I love someone. If someone does acts of service for me, I will receive it well because I understand it. But my husband is words of affirmation. So if I keep speaking acts of service, he's like, I don't understand what you're saying. It's not hitting home. I hope you understand that. So I want you to hold that image in your mind that the only way you can really connect with a spouse, and this goes beyond marriage relationships, also cuts across any kind of relationship, including for your children. You have to first of all understand what that person speaks, the language that they speak, and then find a way to speak that language. That is the only way communication can happen. That is the only way someone can express their love successfully to another human being. There's no other way. That is how this life works. If my husband keeps saying all these words of affirmation to me, and my body language, when he says it to me, I'm just like, oh, thank you. And he's expecting to see me really be very impressed that, oh, wow, thank you so much. And I'm just like, oh, thank you. Oh, I love you too. And then I've moved on. And it's like, I don't understand. It's not me being difficult. It's not that I don't want to express that kind of exuberant appreciation for the words that he's speaking. It's simply because I can't. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's simply because I can't. It hasn't hit that part of my heart that will cause me to respond like that. If I respond like that, I'm pretending. And that can very easily be seen through as well. So I would do my best to say, oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. But the one that would cause the floodgates to open, the floodgates of emotions to open, is the one that is called acts of service. This is how it works. When I realized that everything I had been doing, all I had been doing for my husband in the early days of our marriage, I was merely speaking my own language that he didn't quite understand. And as a result of that, he was not responding to me the way that I was expecting. I thought he would be so overjoyed, but he just couldn't because he didn't understand the language that I was speaking. So this is what I observed. This was my conclusion after reading the book Love Languages and then sitting down to meditate upon my own marriage at the time. Human beings are naturally inclined to give what they need. You communicate in the language that you yourself understand. You're naturally inclined to do that. But for communication to be effective, you must understand the language of the person that you're speaking to. You have to speak to them in their language. Otherwise, it will not be effective. For example, if your own love language is gifts, you will naturally find yourself giving people gifts. When it's their birthday, you go into all sorts of lengths to try and think of what would they like. You're not the kind of person that will just, go to Amazon and buy a voucher and send it to you. That is like, what? How can you just go and buy a voucher? Just a voucher. I mean, you would sit down and think about it. And unless, of course, you think the person wants a voucher, then you know that it's going to mean something to them and then you give it to them. But for someone like that, they will spend days, sometimes even weeks, researching, thinking, what could I give this person, right? You would give gifts. because that is your love language. If your love language is quality time, you are the kind of person that you want to spend time with the person. You become upset and offended if your husband doesn't give you the time of day, or if he's spending too much time watching TV during his downtime. Like, let's talk now, come and sit near me, let's talk about this or whatever it is. But he's watching football and all those things. You're like, I don't understand, you don't have any time for me. Meanwhile, you would basically show up and you want to spend quality time with him. If he's feeling sad or something happened at work, you are there, you say, let's talk about it, and he's like, listen, I don't want to talk about anything, and you're hurt. You're like, but I'm giving you all this quality time in order to show that I support you. Meanwhile, he's saying, listen, I don't want that. Maybe what he actually needs is words of affirmation. A simple text saying that I love you, I believe in you, I stand with you would mean much more to him than you just basically hanging around him. So that is where wires get crossed and people get offended, right? So we tend to give what we want to receive. We tend to give what is natural to us, but it doesn't necessarily mean that is what the person wants to receive. So it is our responsibility to learn the love language of the ones that we love, the people that we love, and then speak their language as regularly as we can. So a lot of the frustration that we experience in the home, whether it's between husband and wife or between parent and child, can typically be traced to the fact that one or both parties are paying very little attention to what the other person needs, like I've explained. So one of two things tend to happen. The first one is the person could be demanding that their own needs be met first. Like, I want you to love me, I want you to do this for me, and they're paying little or no attention to what the person actually needs. Or the other thing that could happen is the person is like, oh, I want to love this person, I want to express my love, I want to understand you, I want our relationship to grow, but then they don't find out precisely how they should do it, and they end up giving what they think the person needs. So I've given the example of they start showering the person with gifts, not really understanding that actually what they need is physical touch. Okay? So when one of these two things or both is playing out in a marriage, what happens is frustration. There's tension in that marriage. There's tension between the parent and the child because they don't feel appreciated, they don't feel accepted, they don't feel loved. And even if you keep doing things, like I explained, and you don't actually get the validation that the person appreciates what you're doing, that you're doing all this stuff, you will feel frustrated as well. So all that frustration, all that tension can actually find its way out of your marriage by learning something as simple as what is my love language and what is the love language of my spouse, and then taking deliberate steps to speak their love language. It's so simple. In fact, in SOAR, when we do our marriage boot camps, this is one of the things that we focus on. Learn the love language of your spouse, learn the love language of yourself. Make sure you are adequately equipped to be able to speak that love language, number one. And number two, we now say over a space of about 3 to 4 weeks, begin to communicate it to them, begin to speak their love language, and start to get into the habit of thinking about them and saying, this person likes words of affirmation. You can say, but I don't like to talk. No, it's not whether you like to talk or not. The person wants words of affirmation. So you would deliberately say, okay, practical things like put it in your calendar and set a reminder and say, 12 o'clock, send a text to my husband. Because it won't come naturally to you. So until you intentionally do it, you won't do it. Do you understand that? You will not do it, and you could go months and years, and there's tension in the house because your husband does not feel loved, and he's probably not communicating your love language as well, and you too, you don't feel loved, and then it's always arguments. The closeness between the two of you diminishes with every passing day. And I can tell you now, the kind of results we have gotten from actually doing those things, I'm amazed. One lady talks about the fact that she communicated her husband's love language, and in return, she just noticed that his disposition towards her was just amazing that over the space of literally, I think 2 to 3 days, he was more cheerful, he was more huggy and all those things. And because they did the exercise together, he knew that her love language was acts of service. He went out of his way, something he would never have done before that time. He went out of his way to communicate, to show that he really loved her through an act of service, and her mind was blown. This is what I mean. Something so simple can literally go a long way in healing the rifts and the conflicts in your marriage. I mean, think about it. Did you know that even Jesus took the time to tell Peter how he wanted to be loved? How he wanted Peter to express his love to him. Right? So he said, Simon, Simon, do you love me? Peter said, I love you, Lord. Oh, I love you. He asked again the second time. Peter said, I love you, I love you. Third time, he was still saying, I love you, I love you. And he was getting offended. I'm telling you this. Peter was returning with words of, I love you, I love you, I love you. And when Jesus kept asking, he's like, how can you be asking me again? But I've just told you 3 times that I love you. I've just tried to communicate that I love you 3 times. Why do you keep asking me that if I love you? And Peter, the Bible says, got offended. Can you see what I'm saying? Until Jesus now said to him that all this I love you, I love you, I love you is not what I'm looking for. This is what I'm looking for, okay? Feed my sheep, feed my lamb. That is what I really want, all right? I'm placing you as a shepherd, and I need you to take on the responsibility that you will do anything. You will lay down your life for these people. That is how you can truly show me that you love me, not I love you, I love you, I love you. You understand? So that's a very good example from scripture that you can keep doing things that you think you are communicating to the person that you love them, but they keep saying, but you don't love me, but you don't love me. And you're genuinely confused and offended. How can you say that? How can you say I don't love you? See everything I've done. See how I keep telling you every day that I love you. And the person says, I love you, we will chop. And you're offended. How can you say that? For you, I love you means everything. To them, it's just 3 words. Okay, I'm going to finish off by telling you why. I said this at the beginning. I'm just going to run through 3 reasons why this principle works and why it will never fail, because it's actually a spiritual principle. It's a love principle. It's based on love, and love is God. God is love. So 3 reasons why it definitely works. Number 1, human beings, our greatest craving is for acceptance, no matter who you are. No matter who you are, no matter how brave the person appears, no matter how independent they appear, like, I don't need anybody. It's not true. It's not true. They are craving acceptance. They want people to accept them. Maybe not the whole world. There'll be someone somewhere that they're receiving that validation and acceptance from. And there's no better way to show someone that you accept them, that you validate them, that you affirm them, than to show that you love them. Love is the greatest form of validation and acceptance. Haven't you noticed that the people that love you, that you know they love you, no matter what anybody might say, once you get in the presence of those people, you just know everything is going to be okay. Why? Because they love you and they accept you. So that craving that we all have, the only way you can really fulfill that craving is by communication that you love and accept that person regardless of who they are. So if your wife or husband goes for a long time feeling like they're not accepted or loved by their spouse, what happens? They begin to withdraw because they're not receiving that validation from that person that they expect to receive it from. They begin to pull back. And if something is not done to close that gap, it soon becomes a gulf. And it feels like the person is married to a stranger. So when people say things like, I'm not in love with you anymore, and they want a divorce, what they're really saying is, I don't feel loved and accepted in this relationship anymore. So you can see how important this is. That's number 1. Number 2, it is a principle that's based on the law of giving. The love languages principle will tell you, communicate love the way the person wants to receive it. So that means you first of all go and figure out what the person's love language is, and then you regularly speak that love language. You regularly give them what they need. So it's based on the law of giving, and the Bible teaches clearly that what you give will be multiplied back to you. The problem is we want to receive first before we give. That's the, like I mentioned before, source of frustration in the family, in the home. So people say things like, well, when he starts pulling his weight around the house, then I'll stop talking to him like that. He should be like a man. He should go out and get a job. He should do things around the house. He just comes back and just sits down, puts his leg up, and I'm supposed to just be speaking to him like, oh, honey, oh, darling. What's that? Hey, you give first though. You give first. You cannot break it. That's a spiritual principle. God wanted the whole earth to be reconciled to him. What did he do? He first of all gave himself. It's a spiritual principle that cannot be broken. You can wait for years. You can wait all your life in a marriage, waiting for your husband to change, waiting for him to begin to do something. And then when he begins to do it, you would then respond by doing what you know you should do. No, you can wait all your life. The principle says it starts with you. So you give first, and God, who is the Lord of the harvest, sees that, oh, my daughter is giving love, and he multiplies it back to you. It is now his responsibility to then go and work on your husband to ensure that you don't miss out on your harvest. That is how it works. So it is backward to think, oh, he has to pull his weight first. He has to do this first. Then me too, I would then do what he wants. You can't do that because that's basically trying to reap where you have not sown. So it starts with you. Plant your own seeds first and then look to God, the Lord of the harvest, for your returns and your harvest. And you will never fail to receive it because God is faithful. And the last one is the love language is basically communicating that you value the person enough to understand them. One of the things that came out of the SOAR boot camps that I just mentioned, we do marriage boot camps once every year. And one of the things that I have seen is beyond the fact that the person feels loved and then they start to respond by showing love to the person in the way they want to receive love. All right, I've already mentioned that. But one of the things that I've also seen come out of that is the person, so like the husband actually feels respected, like honored, like valued, like, you mean, wow, you're taking all these steps, you're going to all these lengths just to make sure that I'm okay. There's something about that communicates value to the person, like, oh, you're really valuing me. You're taking time to understand me. You're taking time to learn my language. Imagine, like I said, I only speak Yoruba and I want to go to China to meet up with a business associate or something. And I get there, I start to speak their language. It might not be perfect. I might only be able to speak 10 words or something. But imagine how that person would feel like, oh, wow, you went out of your way to try and learn this language. I know it's not perfect. I know you're not as fluent as me speaking this language, but you actually took the time. The person will feel so valued, like, wow. So if you want your spouse or your children to feel valued, to feel heard, to feel like you really are interested in them, you must learn their love language and you must speak it regularly. I'm telling you now, I work with teenagers for many, many years. And one of the things teenagers always complain about is, you're not listening to me. They say, you're not listening to me. You're not hearing me. You're not hearing me. And what are they really saying? They're saying, you haven't valued me enough to try and understand my point of view. You just have your own ideas and you're coming to just dump your ideas on me. You haven't sat down to really say, what do you think? That's what teenagers grapple with the most. Do you understand? They don't feel valued because they're like, you don't even want to hear my own side. You've made up your mind. That means I don't count. Right? So that's the third reason. So I'm going to finish up with this. If you haven't already read the book, and there's more than one. So the original one is the 5 love languages, but then there are many spin-offs. So 5 love languages for teenagers, for children, for singles, for men, loads and loads of it. But at least start with the main book, the original, the 5 love languages. I highly recommend that you read that book. I believe that it will save you all sorts of headaches in your relationship, both with your spouse and also with your children. You can also start by going to 5lovelanguages.com to find out. So there's a free quiz there for you to find out what your love language is. You can invite your spouse to take that test as well. At least that's a first step that you can begin to take. I'm sharing with you something that has blessed me. I mean, is it natural to me to speak words of affirmation for my husband? No. What is natural to me is acts of service. But every now and then, I've tried to put a system in place to remind me to speak his language, because I must. It's not a choice. I don't have a choice in the matter. If I want my marriage to be healthy, if I want my marriage to thrive, if I want affection to be flowing like oil in my marriage, I must speak his love language. And he too knows that he must speak my love language. So I put things in place to remind me. So certain systems will make sure that you affirm him with your words. If something goes wrong, I know the way that I'll speak to my husband to make sure that I still affirm him. Do you understand that? I hope that's helped you. I'll be back next week with another episode. Bye.